You know what's funny? The auto industry never agrees on anything. Dealers blame manufacturers blame regulators, environmental groups blame automakers, and automakers blame Congress. And consumers, they blame everybody. So when I saw all the headlines saying the same thing, I got a little suspicious. The electric vehicle mandate is over. Consumers win. Washington changes course. The market is back in charge. That's all good news. But it's almost too neat, too clean, and too perfect. And after spending decades in this business, I've learned something. Whenever a complicated story suddenly becomes simple, somebody left out a chapter. Now, maybe you're thinking, Lauren, don't overthink it. Honestly, that was my first reaction too. Washington rolled back the major electric vehicle policies. The federal tax credits are winding down, and automakers are telling investors they're going to build more of what customers actually are buying. Dealers finally have some breathing room, and that sounds like a happy ending, right? Except I know that's not true. I've watched this industry long enough to know that billion-dollar industries don't simply change direction overnight. Entire product plans are built on 5, 6, and sometimes 10 years in advance. Factories are not rearranged because of one press conference, and supply chains don't reverse course because somebody signs an executive order. The auto industry is like a giant cargo ship. It does not spin around in a day. So I started asking myself a simple question. If Washington changed direction this quickly, what happens to everything that was already in motion? And that question turned into another one, then another. And before I knew it, I wasn't looking at the electric vehicle mandate anymore. I was looking at something much bigger. Before I break this down, I want to remind you to like, subscribe, and click that bell for notifications because you don't want to miss anything. There is a lot going on that impacts your transportation freedom. Let's back up for just a second and look at the big picture. For years, we heard the same message. Electric vehicles were the future. Automakers invested billions of dollars in research and development. Battery factories were announced almost every month. Charging companies expanded rapidly. Utilities started preparing for massive increases in electric demand. Governments created tax credits. States added rebates. Regulators kept tightening emission standards, and Wall Street rewarded companies that promised an all-electric future. We've all heard this story over and over again. Whether you agree with it or not, everybody seemed to be rowing in the same direction. Then consumers did something nobody expected. They slowed down. Not stopped, they just slowed way down. And that's an important distinction. People still bought some EVs, but not nearly as quickly as many forecasts predicted. And I've been saying this for a long time and took a lot of heat for it too. But meanwhile, hybrids started flying off dealer lots. Consumers looked at their own lifestyles, budgets, commutes, and they voted with their dollars, like you always do. And that's how markets are supposed to work. People decide, companies respond. End of story. But you need to look beyond the headlines here. I started reading the stuff nobody else reads. Congressional reports, regulatory filings, legal analysis, policy papers. It's not exactly beach reading, but buried inside those documents, I kept finding something strange. Nobody working in automotive policy was acting like this fight was over. In fact, the people closest to the issue kept using language like the next phase, the remaining issue, the unfinished business. And that surprised me because if Washington had really settled this, why were experts talking like the biggest battle didn't just happen yet? So I reached out to a few of my contacts. Some work in the auto industry, some work in policy or law, and I asked every one of them the same basic question. What am I missing? The answers were surprisingly similar. Nobody gave me a dramatic speech, no one sounded an alarm, but everything they told me encouraged me to keep digging. So I did. Eventually I noticed a pattern. Every conversation, no matter where it started, ended up pointing in exactly the same direction. California, of course. Now, if you've followed the auto industry for any length of time, that probably doesn't shock you. California has always done its own thing. Different regulations, emissions rules, and fuel standards, nothing new there. But Washington had supposedly changed the entire playing field. Lee Zeldin removed the EV mandate under the EPA. The president signed the congressional act stripping California of the most important power they had over the auto industry. So why was everyone still talking about California? Here's something I didn't think enough people understood. California doesn't just influence California. Historically, it's about 17 states that have chosen to adopt California's emissions framework instead of following the federal standard. And there are the usual subjects: New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Washington State, Oregon, Colorado, and others. Now put yourself in the shoes of an automaker. You've got engineers in Michigan, factories in Kentucky, suppliers in Ohio, dealers in every state. Do you build one version of your vehicle for California and another for Texas and another for Florida and another for New York? You could, but every additional version costs a lot of money because you have engineering and testing, certification, manufacturing, inventory, parts, training technicians. It's incredibly expensive. And eventually companies just start asking a different question. What's the strictest law we have to meet? Because if we build to the highest, toughest standard, you can always sell the vehicle almost everywhere. And this is what they're doing in Europe as well. That's not politics. That's manufacturing. It's actually common sense. And suddenly, California isn't just making rules for California anymore. Its decisions begin influencing product planning across a much larger portion of the country. Then just when I thought I understood the story, California made another move because the battle for your transportation freedom is far from over. It's only just begun. But before I tell you why, let's take a quick detour. We'll get to the video in a second. Summer is here, and if you want to actually feel confident, less bloated, and energized this summer, not just look like it on the outside, it starts with your gut. I thought being bloated every day was just normal. It's not. And once I fixed my gut, everything changed. My digestion, my skin, my hair. And the one thing that made the biggest difference is cowboy colostrum, which dropped a new cookies and cream flavor. I'm obsessed with it. I started taking cowboy colostrum for my gut, but the results I didn't expect. The one that shocked me, my hair is noticeably thicker and fuller, my skin clearer, and I'm not bloated after every meal anymore. Colostrum supports gut health, and when your gut is right, everything else follows. Digestion, bloating, skin care, clarity, hair growth, all of it. And this isn't just my experience. Cowboy ran a clinical study and the numbers backed it up. 83% of participants reported improved gut health. 79% experienced less bloating and inflammation. 72% saw improved digestion and 62% saw fuller, thicker hair. Today's sponsor is Cowboy Colostrum, and they offer the highest quality bovine colostrum available in the U.S. It's 100% made in America from 100% American grass-fed cows. Unlike other colostrum brands, Cowboy is true, first-day, whole colostrum, rich in bioactives like immunoglobulins and growth factors. Don't worry, Cowboy Colostrum only collects the surplus colostrum after baby calves have had their fill. Cowboy Colostrum isn't processed or stripped down. Their colostrum is whole, full fat, and high protein for the ultimate nutrient density, making the highest quality bovine colostrum you can buy. No artificial flavors, no fillers, just real whole ingredients. And they just launched their most indulgent flavor yet, cookies and cream. Mixed with milk, it tastes like nostalgic cookies and cream milkshake, but it's the same whole, unstripped colostrum, no fillers or shortcuts. It's become a part of my routine. I have it every morning. Pack it when I travel, throw it in smoothies, a treat that actually fits into my day. Not only will Cowboy Colostrum bring stability into your gut, the peptides and growth factors will make your skin and hair look amazing. And if you want to feel your best heading into the summer, this is the one daily habit that actually delivers results you can see. Try the new cookies and cream flavor for yourself. For a limited time, our listeners get up to 25% off their entire order. Just head to cowboycolostrum.com/fix. Use the code FIX, F-I-X, at checkout. That's 25% off when you use code FIX. cowboycolostrum.com/fix. Now, back to the video. We've been arguing about electric vehicles, emissions, and politics, but underneath all of that, there's another question almost nobody is asking. Who actually decides what vehicles get built? Not who sells them, but who designs, engineers, and approves them. Who decides whether your favorite engine survives another generation? That is a completely different conversation. The auto industry is not building cars for today. But here's something most people never think about. The vehicle sitting on a dealer lot today started its life years ago. Some product planners probably argued over it 5 or 10 years ago. Executives, marketing teams, and product planning departments find a spot in the marketplace that needs to be filled or a car that needs to be updated. Engineers spent years designing it, suppliers spent time building components, and billions of dollars were committed before the first customer ever even saw it. This industry moves very slowly because it has to. There's a lot of money involved. You can't redesign a pickup truck because politicians changed their mind 6 months ago, and you can't build an engine in January and then decide by June, never mind. That's not how manufacturing works. That's why California matters. Not because California sells the most cars, it's because California influences what manufacturers believe they'll need to build years from now. That's a huge distinction. Now, let me tell you something I've heard from automakers for years. Nobody wants 50 different rule books with different emission standards, certification processes, compliance testing, paperwork, or engineering requirements. That would be ridiculous. And every variation costs money. So eventually, somebody inside every boardroom asks, what's the toughest standard? Because if you satisfy the toughest regulator, life got a whole lot easier and you can save some money and maybe show a profit. That's economics. Which means, as I've been saying for many years, California's influence has never been limited to California. So if Washington just pulled back, what happens to everything California already built? Surely it just disappears, right? No, wrong. California wasn't prepared to retreat. It was prepared for another push. While Washington was celebrating the end of the federal EV incentives, California was putting together another one, a brand new program called My First EV. They doubled down after everything the federal government did to strip back California's power is almost enough to laugh. The name sounds friendly, but of course, it's another Gavin Newsom project. How nice that California wants to help first-time buyers. But whenever government programs have cheerful names, that's usually a good indication to read the bill. And that's where the story always is. So here's what we know. California intends to offer thousands of dollars toward a purchase or lease of a qualified, keyword, electric vehicle for first-time buyers. Used EVs would qualify for a smaller incentive, and unlike some earlier proposals, several Tesla models appear to remain ineligible. And how convenient. The largest EV maker, Tesla, is not included on the list? How odd. Sounds very political to me. The discount would happen right at the dealership, just like the old federal tax credit. Simple enough. But here's the catch. The proposal would require manufacturers to match the state's contribution. What? Wait, let me read that again. The state contributes money, the automaker contributes money, and the customer gets a discount. Now maybe that sounds great. Who doesn't like saving money? But I started looking into it from the manufacturer's perspective. You're Ford, Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, General Motors, or Volkswagen. You sell cars all over America. California comes to you and essentially says, we're creating an incentive program and we'd like you to help pay for it. Now, technically, you could refuse, but let's be honest. Can you? California isn't some tiny market. It's the largest new vehicle market in the country. Walk away from that? Really? I don't know. That's not much of a choice. No, it's leverage. And they have a lot of it. And if you follow the money, you'll find out who's paying for it. And we know who that is. It's you. Because manufacturers don't create money. They recover costs. That's how business survives. Nobody absorbs billions of dollars indefinitely because the government asks nicely. So if California expects manufacturers to put real money into every qualifying vehicle, where does the money come from? Does it come out of profits? Maybe. Does it reduce engineering budgets? Possibly. Does it reduce incentives somewhere else? It sure could. Does it eventually find its way into vehicle pricing? Oh, yes, it does. Every cost eventually lands somewhere. And that is you. You see that in the price of vehicles today. This is the part that's really puzzling. Consumers have already voted at dealerships by what they've been buying. Hybrids. Toyota and Honda can't build them fast enough. Even Ford and Volkswagen hybrids are selling well. People looked at battery EVs and they looked at hybrids and they made their own decision and voted with their wallet. Why? Because hybrids fit into their lives. No charging schedule, no range planning, lower insurance costs. They simply work. Consumers have been sending that message for a couple of years now, which made me wonder, if consumers are increasingly choosing hybrids on their own, why is government still trying to push battery EVs? That's not a political question, but a market question, and it's one I don't think gets asked nearly enough. At this point, we're not talking about California anymore. It's about incentives, regulations, and market signals. The government and consumers are fighting for the metaphorical wheel to control the automotive market. I just said this story is bigger than California. So where exactly are we going next? I always say follow the money. Money tells you who benefits. Incentives tell you they're behaving that way. Forget electric cars, politics, and California for just a minute. Let's talk about business. Imagine you're running a global automaker. You've spent the last decade being told one thing: the future is electric. Governments around the world are writing regulations based on that assumption. Investors are rewarding companies that announce ambitious EV plans. Federal tax credits encourage buyers. States add even more incentives. Utilities begin investing billions to prepare for higher electric demand, which we've seen everywhere across the country, and battery manufacturers build massive new factories. Mining companies invest in lithium, nickel, and graphite, and charging companies promise thousands of new stations. And we all know that means our electric bill is going to go up because my personal one has doubled and I am not happy about it. Everybody starts investing. Everybody. Now stop. Ask yourself a question. What happens when that direction suddenly changes? Because that's exactly where we are today. Here's something I think got lost. The money has already been spent. Billions have been invested in electric vehicle platforms and everything related to them. As I outlined earlier, yes, they have taken losses, big losses. It's real money, factories, jobs, and contracts and more. So when Washington suddenly changes direction, those investments don't disappear. Neither do the people whose livelihoods now depend on them. Here's the part I don't think most consumers ever see. People think this is a fight between automakers and government. It isn't. It's an ecosystem. Picture a giant spider web and pull one strand and everything moves. Automakers, battery suppliers, charging companies, utility companies, software developers, lobbyists, state and federal agencies, even insurance companies are adapting pricing models around new technology. It's all connected. Once enough industries become financially dependent on one direction, changing direction becomes incredibly difficult. Not because everyone is secretly working together, because everyone has something to lose. This is where somebody always says, "So you're saying there's some giant conspiracy?" No, actually I'm saying something much simpler. People protect investments. That's it. If you spent billions preparing for one future, you're naturally going to support policies that help protect those investments. That's human nature, not politics. If tomorrow the government announced everybody had to switch back to gasoline-only vehicles, battery manufacturers would not be thrilled. Neither would utility companies or charging companies because they're making billions of dollars. The exact same thing works in reverse. And here's where I think the conversation gets disconnected. Government keeps talking about adoption. Consumers keep talking about affordability. Those are not the same conversation. I've talked to a lot of families all over the country. Very few of them wake up in the morning thinking, "I wonder how I can help regulators meet long-term transportation goals." Because they're not. They're thinking, can I afford this car payment? Can I pay for the insurance? Where am I going to charge it? Will it tow my boat? All these common sense questions that government never thinks about. Those are real world questions. Consumers buy transportation. Government often talks about transformation. And believe me, that's a huge difference. Now let's look back into California, because this is where those two worlds collide. Consumers have increasingly been moved toward hybrids. And at the same time, California is preparing to roll out its My First EV incentive. You can tell my opinion of it pretty quickly. Electric vehicles cost more than many comparable gasoline models. Lowering the purchase price could help more people consider one. I understand that argument, but here's what's bothering me. The purchase price is only one piece of ownership. What about the insurance? Many EV owners are finding insurance premiums significantly higher than they expected. What about charging costs in areas with high electricity rates, like here in New York State? What about replacing a battery outside of its warranty? That's expensive. Consumers aren't buying a car for one day. They're buying a car for years of ownership. And that's where I think policymakers sometimes lose the plot. Mostly because they get driven places. They have drivers. They don't pay for their cars. We pay for that in our tax dollars. Making the first payment easier doesn't necessarily make ownership less expensive, and that's why hybrids and gas-powered cars are so popular. Consumers have spoken. They like improved fuel economy, the convenience of gasoline, and not worrying about charging. Why keep designing incentive programs that overwhelmingly favor one technology? Shouldn't the market be allowed to answer the question? Okay, let's put the tinfoil hat on for just 1 minute. If battery electric vehicles are truly the inevitable future, why do they still need so much help? Tax credits, state rebates, charging grants, mandates, manufacturer discounts, now another California incentive. What if this isn't really about helping consumers buy electric cars? What if it's also about keeping the broader EV ecosystem moving? Because once billions have been invested, governments don't want those investments sitting idle. Companies don't want factories operating below capacity. Utilities don't want slower demand growth than what they plan for because there's billions of dollars, that's why. And charging companies certainly don't want fewer customers. Again, I'm not saying that's the only reason. I'm saying it's impossible to ignore that everyone has an incentive to keep momentum going. And when everyone has an incentive, you should probably pay attention. This investigation was never really about electric cars. It wasn't even really about California. It was about something much bigger. Who gets to steer the market? Consumers or policymakers trying to accelerate the market in a particular direction? Because if those two are pulling in different directions, eventually something has to give. Government can influence the purchase, but it can't change your personal experience. Consumers live with these vehicles for years, not for election cycles. Then I looked back at my notes. The federal rollback, the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, those 17 states, forced manufacturer matching, hybrids, insurance, battery investments, and consumer behavior. At first, they look like separate stories, but we know they're all tied into one. It's just not about electric vehicles. It's about influence. Who has it? Who pays for it? Who benefits from it, and who gets to decide when the market has spoken. Because maybe the biggest mistake we've all made is thinking that this debate has been about engines. Maybe it's always been about who gets to make the choices and who's investing. There's one last question I haven't answered, and it's probably the most important one. If government keeps steering and manufacturers keep adapting and consumers keep voting with their wallets, will car brands build the best products they can? Because consumers will buy it. And that's a fact that government needs to know. Remember, you are the one steering this ship.